Date, January 1942. Location, the North Atlantic, 400 miles east of Cape Hatteras, North Carolina. Altitude, position, sea level, pitch black night. A single torpedo track, a white, phosphorescent line of death, sliced through the inky blackness. It struck the hull of the tanker Pan, Massachusetts, just forward of the bridge. The explosion wasn't a roar. It was a sickening, tearing thud that echoed through the bones of every man still awake. Oil, a river of black crude, instantly erupted, catching fire and turning the night into a horrific blazing sunrise. The men of the U.S. Merchant Marine called this stretch of water the Atlantic Graveyard. The Germans, with chilling precision, called it Operation Drumbeat, Paukenschlag. After Pearl Harbor, America was dragged into a world war, yet its long, vulnerable coastline was virtually undefended against the elite U-boat commanders, the Grey Wolves of Admiral Karl Dönitz. The irony was palpable, the central contradiction of this war's early days. The mightiest industrial nation on Earth was being strangled in its own bathtub. From January to July 1942, Dönitz's U-boats sank over 600 ships off the American coast. Shipyards sat idle, defenses were non-existent, and the American public remained dangerously oblivious. Perspective. Admiral Karl Dönitz, quotation based on historical records. The American coast is the richest target of all. They have no defenses, no blackout, and their convoys are organized with the competence of a Sunday picnic. We can sink their ships faster than they can replace them. The Americans are children in this war. This was the terrifying chasm America had to cross. To survive, Britain needed food, fuel, and the tools of war. To win, the Allies needed to launch two massive invasions, one across North Africa and the other across the English Channel. All of it, from the fuel for a Sherman tank to the beans for a British mess hall, had to travel by sea. The logistical challenge was more than just strategic, it was existential. The German High Command, particularly the Japanese Admiralty, saw the problem in stark industrial terms. America was building battleships and aircraft carriers, but the slow, mundane, oil-burning freighters were the true, indispensable lifeblood, and they were being eradicated. In Washington, war planners reviewed the mounting losses. The equation was simple. Britain required a steady flow of 750,000 tons of supplies per month simply to stay in the war. Every Allied ship lost meant German boots marching further across Europe. Every torpedo fired was a direct hit on the timetable for victory. The solution did not come from a four-star admiral or a brilliant tactician, but from a visionary shipbuilder named Henry J. Kaiser. Kaiser was an outsider, a construction magnate known for building the Hoover Dam and the Grand Coulee Dam. He knew nothing about ships, but everything about scale. The British had initially approached the US with a desperate design, a simple, cheap, and easy-to-build cargo vessel. They called it the Ugly Duckling. Americans renamed it the Liberty Ship. The conventional wisdom in shipbuilding, perfected over centuries, dictated that a ship was a handcrafted masterpiece, taking months, even years, to construct. A small ship, perhaps 10,000 deadweight tons, required 2,500,000 rivets, each one hammered in by a team of highly skilled laborers. Kaiser threw this tradition into the sea. His genius lay in embracing two technologies that would redefine industrial warfare: welding and prefabrication. Instead of building a ship piece by piece, Kaiser envisioned a colossal assembly line. Sections of the ship, the bow, the stern, the huge midsection, would be fabricated miles away, sometimes in totally separate factories, and then trucked to the shipyard. Instead of rivets which required drilling and hammering, workers used arc welding. This allowed unskilled laborers, many of them women, the Rosie the Riveters of the assembly line, to join massive steel plates with speed and efficiency never before seen. In the initial days, the goal seemed like fantasy: build 3 ships a day. The Japanese admirals, privy to intelligence about America's supposed plan to produce 30,000 vessels of all types, from destroyers to landing craft, over the course of the war, dismissed it as outlandish American propaganda. It was, in their estimation, a physical and logistical impossibility. Perspective, American engineer Richmond Shipyard, composite based on contemporary worker accounts. They handed me a welding torch, and I'd never held anything heavier than a kitchen spoon. We were told this piece of metal, this 10-foot bulkhead, had to be done by the end of the shift. The men who'd done this work for 20 years told us we were fools, but we weren't just building ships. We were buying time. And we were angry. Every joint we welded was a kickback at that U-boat captain off the Jersey coast. The challenge was monumental. The initial British design for the Liberty ship, the SS Patrick Henry, took 230 days to construct. If America was to stop the bleeding in the Atlantic and deliver the troops to Europe, that number had to shrink dramatically. In the shipyards of Richmond, California and Permanente, Oregon, an unprecedented human and industrial experiment was taking place. The pace was relentless, the pressure absolute. The prize was not just victory, but the very survival of the democratic world. The Atlantic was a brutal, deadly chasm, and the only bridge across it had to be built from steel, sweat, and sheer, uncompromising American scale. The stage was set for the clash of two opposing strategies, German tactical precision versus American industrial brute force. The Grey Wolves were masters of the hunt, but they were about to face an industrial blizzard that threatened to bury them alive. The only question was, could Kaiser's revolutionary method work, and could it produce enough ships before the Allies were starved into submission? If you've been gripped by the untold story of the American war machine, make sure you don't miss the rest of this epic series. Hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so you can follow the journey from the shipyards of Richmond to the battlefields of the Atlantic. Now, let's get back to the crucible of war. The challenge was no longer if America could build the Liberty ship, but how fast. The time it took to build the first ship, 230 days, was a death sentence. Kaiser's strategy was the complete deconstruction of the shipbuilding process into hundreds of simple, repetitive tasks that required minimal training. The old craftsmen were replaced by a legion of novices, farmers, homemakers, teachers, and retirees. They became specialized in a single component, a bilge pump connection, a ventilation duct, a specific section of the hull plate. This approach was a triumph of the emerging field of production engineering. Kaiser realized that the traditional shipyard layout was fundamentally inefficient. He reorganized the flow of materials like a factory, not a construction site. Massive 120-ton cranes lifted entire prefabricated sections, weighing more than a large locomotive, and dropped them into place. The specifications of the Liberty ship, EC2SC1 designation, were unglamorous but ruthlessly efficient. Length, 441 feet, 6 inches. Tonnage, approximately 10 to 500 deadweight tons. Engine, simple 2,500 horsepower triple expansion steam engine, a 19th century design chosen for reliability and ease of mass production, not speed. Cargo capacity, enough to carry 2,040 jeeps, 440 light tanks, or enough grain to feed 75,000 people for a month. The early days were fraught with structural failure and professional skepticism. The use of welding over riveting introduced a serious, terrifying flaw: brittle fracture. Several Liberty ships, including the SS Schenectady in 1943, literally snapped in half in cold weather or heavy seas. The German press gleefully reported these incidents, calling them Kaiser's cardboard coffins. This technological crisis demanded an immediate, intense response. Metallurgists and engineers worked around the clock, discovering that the specific grade of steel and the welding techniques used in freezing conditions made the hull vulnerable to catastrophic failure. Reinforcements and new procedures, including crack arresters and stricter welding quality control, were rapidly implemented. This immediate adaptation under duress defined the American industrial effort. The defect did not stop production. It made the product better, faster. As production ramped up, the true scale of the German U-boat offensive became clear in the minds of the men on the Atlantic. Submarines, now hunting in coordinated wolf packs, brutal tactic, were achieving tactical superiority. The Allies were losing ships faster than they could be replaced. Perspective: American Merchant Mariner, composite based on historical accounts of survivors. You'd see the sunrise and then you'd see the slick, oil stretching for miles and debris. You didn't need to see the U-boat, you just knew it was there. Every crossing was a coin flip. The worst part was the waiting, knowing you were a moving target, slow as a brick, and your only defense was the flimsy hope of a destroyer finding you before the torpedo did. The U-boat commanders were achieving ace status in weeks. Commander Otto Kretschmer, the silent hunter, was one of the deadliest, sinking over 40 ships before his capture. The fear wasn't just physical, it was psychological. The constant invisible threat was eroding morale across the entire Allied command. Churchill, in a desperate message to Roosevelt, famously stated that the only thing that truly frightened him was the U-boat threat. The strategy of the Allies was at a breaking point, and the pressure on Kaiser's shipyards became an essential clock, counting down to total strategic failure. The answer to this terror came not in months, but in days. Kaiser publicly challenged his workers to break the world record. He aimed to build a Liberty ship in under 10 days. The skeptics laughed. In September 1942, the yard at Permanente, California, began construction on the SS Robert E. Peary. 0 hours, the keel was laid. Day 2. The massive prefabricated sections of the hull were craned into place. Day 3. The decks were installed. Day 4. The machinery and superstructure were fitted. Day 4. 15 hours, 29 minutes. The ship was launched, an astonishing feat of logistics and labor. But the ship wasn't finished. It took an additional 3 days of fitting out to make it seaworthy. Total time from keel to complete ship, 7 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes. The news shocked the world. It was a statement of industrial capability that transcended mere shipbuilding. It was a declaration of war by the American working class. For Admiral Dönitz, who had based his entire strategy on the slow, ponderous capacity of traditional shipyards, this was a devastating strategic blow. The Robert E. Peary was the physical manifestation of the impossible. This record, while a phenomenal publicity stunt, became the new operational goal. By 1943, the average time to build a Liberty ship was reduced to just 42 days. The sheer volume of ships pouring out of American yards began to close the lethal chasm in the Atlantic. The Liberty ship, once the ugly duckling, had evolved into the unglamorous, yet indomitable workhorse of the West. The industrial miracle was underway, but the final devastating answer to the U-boat threat would require not just volume, but the creation of an entirely new class of specialized naval weapon. The U-boats continued their deadly work, but the strategic landscape was changing. The volume of Liberty ships meant that even with heavy losses, Allied supply lines were holding. The focus shifted from volume to protection. The primary weakness of the convoys was the vast open ocean, the so-called mid-Atlantic gap, where Allied air cover could not reach. This was the U-boat sanctuary, the place where wolf packs could hunt with impunity. The naval answer to the mid-Atlantic gap was not a new destroyer or a better depth charge, but a completely new type of vessel, the escort carrier, or CVE, carrier vessel escort. The Germans called them Jeep carriers, or Woolworth carriers, in derision, but their impact was anything but cheap. The escort carrier was, in itself, another miracle of adaptation and mass production. Many of the first CVEs were built on modified hulls of the Liberty, or later, the faster Victory ship. They were slow, lightly armored, and rudimentary, but they carried the one thing the U-boats truly feared: aircraft. The most famous of these were the Casablanca-class carriers, produced by Kaiser's yards. In an astounding demonstration of industrial flexibility, Kaiser took the assembly line techniques of the Liberty ship and applied them to these complex naval vessels. Specifications of the CVEs, e.g. USS Casablanca. Length, 512 feet, just slightly longer than a Liberty ship. Speed, 19 knots, fast enough to keep up with the faster convoys. Aircraft carried 28 aircraft, primarily Grumman F-4F Wildcats and Grumman TBF Avengers. The strategic shift was revolutionary. Instead of merely escorting the convoys from the flanks, the escort carriers formed hunter-killer groups. These groups, comprising the CVE and a few fast destroyers or destroyer escorts, operated independently, seeking out and destroying the U-boats in the mid-Atlantic gap. Perspective: U-boat captain composite based on German naval archives. Before the little carriers, the war was a hunt. We were the wolves, and the convoys were the sheep. We were masters of the dive and the dark. But then there was the sound. Not the low beat of a propeller, but the buzz of an engine high above. We were no longer hunting. We were being hunted. The ocean was shrinking, and the enemy was now everywhere, above, below, and on the surface. The American industrial surge was matched by an equally important technological leap. The CVEs were equipped with two secret weapons that turned the tide of the war in the Atlantic: high-frequency direction finding, HFDF or HFDUF, and highly effective centimetric radar. HFDF. This technology could instantly pinpoint the location of a U-boat the moment its captain used its radio to report to headquarters in France. The Germans believed their transmissions were too brief to be traced. They were wrong. Centimetric radar. Early radar was large and imprecise. The new, smaller and more accurate radar sets installed on the CVEs and their aircraft could spot the small black conning tower of a surfaced U-boat, even in rough seas or at night. The combination was devastating. The U-boat, once the silent predator, was now easily located by HFDF and hunted down by aircraft guided by radar. The true turning point of the Battle of the Atlantic, the moment the industrial scale met strategic genius, occurred in May 1943, a period now known as Black May. In this single, brutal month, the Allied forces used their new assets: overwhelming numbers of escort ships, made possible by the shipyards, hunter-killer groups led by the new CVEs, and superior technology, HFDF, radar. The outcome was catastrophic for Dönitz's U-boat fleet. Allied losses: 34 ships sunk. German losses: 43 U-boats sunk, more than the German Navy could replace. The iron grip of the U-boats was finally broken. The destruction rate was unsustainable. Dönitz, facing the loss of his most experienced crews and a strategic reversal he had deemed impossible, was forced to withdraw most of his U-boats from the North Atlantic trade routes. The tactical victory was achieved in the air and on the water, but its foundation was built on the welding beds of Richmond and Permanente. The Japanese Admirals' propaganda had become a terrifying reality. The sheer scale of American production had simply overwhelmed German tactical skill. The thousands of Liberty and Victory ships, the 30,000-ship Miracle, had not only replaced the losses, but had provided the platforms, the CVE hulls, for the ultimate counter-weapon. The way was now clear. The convoys would survive, and the vast armada needed to invade Europe was ready to be deployed. The era of the U-boat dominance was over, replaced by the relentless, suffocating pressure of American industrial might. By late 1943, the American production effort had achieved a scale that dwarfed all previous human endeavors. The Liberty ship was superseded by the faster, slightly more advanced Victory ship, VC-2 SAP-2, built to last beyond the war. The statistics are staggering, a numerical testament to the industrial determination. Total Liberty ships built 2,610 vessels. Total Victory ships built 531 vessels. Total escort carriers, CVEs, built 122 vessels. Total landing craft, LSTs, LCIs, etc., over 24,000 vessels. The initial goal of 30,000 vessels was not just met, it was the foundation upon which the true arsenal was built. This mass production was the single most decisive factor in the logistical outcome of the war. Perspective: Allied logistician, composite based on contemporary reports. We stopped asking, can we move it? And started asking, how much can we fit? The supply lines to Europe and the Pacific became less like a strained thread and more like a colossal multi-lane highway. Every single plane, every rifle, every gallon of gasoline used in the invasion of Europe was delivered by a Liberty ship. They were the silent foundation of D-Day. This industrial triumph, however, came with a heavy and often overlooked human cost, both in the yards and on the sea. In the shipyards, the frantic pace led to grueling conditions. Workers often worked double or triple shifts. The welding fumes, the constant noise of the cranes and hammers, and the sheer physical demand were immense. But there was a unique sense of purpose. Perspective: Rosie the welder, Richmond shipyard, composite based on historical interviews. I was a mother of 3, and I'd never worked outside the home. But suddenly my job, welding this piece of metal joining these 2 plates, was a direct line to my son who was fighting overseas. It wasn't about the paycheck. It was about beating Hitler. We were a part of the fight, and you didn't quit, not when the German boys were still sinking our ships. On the ocean, the merchant mariners, the men who sailed the Liberty ships, bore the highest casualty rate of any American service outside of the Marine Corps. 1 in 26 merchant mariners who served were killed. They were civilians, sailing in slow, poorly armed vessels, often equipped with engines intentionally built to be simple rather than powerful. The U-boats, though strategically defeated, remained a deadly threat until the final days of the war. The mariners knew that if a torpedo hit, their ship was unlikely to sink quickly, but the cargo, often high-octane aviation fuel or ammunition, would incinerate the crew. The choice was often a quick death in the flames or a slow freezing death in the frigid Atlantic. The very simplicity that made the Liberty ship a production miracle also made it vulnerable. The triple expansion steam engine was slow, giving the ship a maximum speed of around 11 knots. This low speed made convoys highly susceptible to attack, but it was a necessary sacrifice for the sake of mass production. This was the final, profound irony of the industrial war. The essential tool of victory was the single most disposable and vulnerable vessel in the fleet. The crews of these ships were the delivery drivers of the war, often forgotten in the grand narratives of battleships and fighter planes. Their determination, however, was the final, uncrushable factor. They kept sailing, even when they knew the chances of sinking were terrifyingly high. The success of the 30,000-ship miracle was ultimately a testimony not just to the power of the American factory, but to the ordinary men and women, welders, engineers, and sailors, who proved that collective, dedicated effort could shatter the most sophisticated military strategies. The tide of steel they created was now washing across the beaches of Normandy, North Africa, and the Pacific. The logistical war had been won. By 1944, the sheer weight of American production had not only neutralized the U-boat threat, but had built the fleet necessary for global offensive operations. The ships built in the American yards were the vessels that carried the armies of liberation. Operation Overlord, D-Day. The landing forces relied almost entirely on the landing craft, LCIs, LSTs, manufactured at the yards. The logistics of supplying the beachhead, the movement of millions of tons of material, was sustained by the endless stream of Liberty and Victory ships. The Pacific War. The CVE escort carriers, built by the thousands, proved their worth in major engagements, notably the Battle off Samar, where a handful of these Woolworth carriers, crewed by determined sailors, managed to fight off a vastly superior Japanese battle fleet. They became the ultimate symbol of American industrial adaptability. The Axis powers, particularly Japan, had based their strategic assessments on the industrial capacity they had witnessed in World War I, failing to comprehend the scale of modern American mass production and the concept of interchangeable prefabricated components. Their laughter at the supposed 30,000-ship propaganda was replaced by a strategic, cold dread. They had been utterly defeated by the most massive logistical effort in human history. The war ended, and the immediate need for endless cargo ships vanished. The history of the Liberty ship ends with a poignant, powerful silence. The U.S. government, prioritizing the return to peacetime commerce, rapidly sold, scrapped, or mothballed the vast majority of the fleet. The ships that had been built so quickly to win the war were now seen as relics, too slow and inefficient for the post-war world. The ultimate irony of the Liberty ship lies in its immediate post-war demise. Built for speed of production rather than longevity, many of them were deliberately scuttled or sold for scrap. Of the 2,610 Liberty ships built, only 2 remain fully functional and preserved in the United States: the SS Jeremiah O'Brien and the SS John W. Brown. The vast, silent fleet that saved the world, the backbone of the Allied victory, vanished almost entirely from the waves. The legacy of the 30,000-ship miracle, therefore, is not found in the vessels themselves, but in the lessons learned and the strategic truth they represent. The Second World War was won on many battlefields: the deserts of North Africa, the skies over Germany, the frozen plains of the Eastern Front. But all of those fronts relied utterly on a single, unglamorous bridge, the Atlantic. That bridge was built not by a single act of genius, but by the relentless organized effort of ordinary people in the American shipyards. The engineers and welders, The women and the novices turned steel plates into a tidal wave of deliverance. They built the impossible, and in doing so they saved a world that had laughed at their ambition. Their fleet may be gone, but the lesson remains. Scale is strategy, and true victory belongs to the nation that can forge the most steel, the fastest. Theirs is a silent, profound, and utterly essential victory. This documentary chronicled the industrial, strategic, and human story of America's manufacturing miracle during World War II. If this epic tale of logistics and courage resonated with you, and you want to continue exploring the hidden strategies and forgotten heroes of history, please like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more in-depth historical narratives.